Good morning. Welcome to Vineyard Milwaukee. We're so glad that you've joined us this morning. Psalm 46 says, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God, we welcome your presence in our homes this morning. I pray that you would reveal yourself and reveal your goodness to us. Amen. When darkness tries to roll over my bones, when sorrow comes to steal the joy I own, when brokenness and pain is all I know, I won't be shaken, I won't be shaken. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Oh, and shame no longer has a place to hide. I am not a captive to the lies. I'm not afraid to leave my past behind. I won't be shaken. I won't be shaken. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out a grave. There's resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name. There's power in your name. There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out a grave. There's resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name. There's power in your name. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Standing in your love. Standing in your love. You are my safe place when I'm weak. You are always near. that I am God. Slow down. In me your peace is found. I've got it all. I've got it all. In my head. Rivers of joy stream from your fountain, bringing me strength, the peace of your presence. Though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the sea, and though my world it quakes, I won't fear. 'Cause you say, be still, know that I am God. Slow down. In me your peace is found. I've got it all. I've got it all. In my head. You break the bow and shatter the spear. Your perfect love casts out all fears. You stop the wars that wage within. You bring me hope so I can begin. You break the bow and shatter the spear. Your perfect love casts out all fears. You stop the wars that wage within. You bring me hope so I can begin. You say, be still, and know that I am God. Slow down. In me your peace is found.
Good morning, Vineyard Milwaukee. So good to be with you this morning. Most of you know, but in case you don't know, we are starting to meet in person at Walker Square Park, which is just a few blocks from our church building. And we're meeting outside. We're just asking you to bring your own chair or blanket to sit on, your own cup of coffee, but just an opportunity for us to worship together and to see each other in a safe environment where we can be socially distanced and be outside. So as long as the weather permits, we're going to be meeting there every Sunday at 11 a.m. So if you're watching this, you may be watching it because you don't feel yet safe to go and meet in person, which is fine. That's why we'll continue to have our online presence. Or maybe you weren't aware. So you could participate here now and then join us at 11 at Walker Square Park. But either way, we're really glad you're with us today. So if you were with us last week, you know that we have joined with churches from all over the city of Milwaukee and the surrounding suburbs for just the purpose of solidarity and unity. We're joining together and we're preaching basically the same 4-week sermon series. And we're also participating in follow-up small group discussions. I know several members of our church participated last week, and in the 3 weeks ahead, there's a follow-up to the sermon where you have a chance to meet with other followers of Jesus from around the city to kind of go a little deeper and to dive in a little deeper together in a small group kind of shared discussion. And so if you'd like to participate in that, please email me or email us at the church, and we'd love to send you the Zoom link so you can join us and be part of one of those discussions. They're meeting Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights. You can choose any one of those nights at 6:30, and we'd love for you to be a part of that. And so if you joined us last week, you know Dave kind of introduced the series by kind of going through the history of the church in America and our connection with how we dealt with issues of race as the church in America, and kind of went through the history of that. And today I'm going to kind of continue on that thread a little bit, but today I'm going to be more specifically talking about trauma and within the American experience. And the focus today will be focused more on the experience of African Americans in our country and some of the trauma around that, and then what the church's responsibility as a response should be to that. So let me just pray for us, and I'm going to dive in. Lord, I just really am grateful to have an opportunity to meet together, and I just pray that you would open up the eyes of our heart to hear you, to see you, to experience you, Lord, and your Spirit would just be on the move, just stirring up whatever it is you need to stir up in each of us today. Pray you'd put power on this message in Jesus' name. Amen. So I just want to start today. I mentioned this in another talk I did several months ago, where I was meeting with, I've been trained as a spiritual director. I don't know if you know what that is, but I'll meet with directees for about an hour, and I just spend time listening to their experiences and looking for the activity of God in their lives and asking questions and just kind of sharing, being kind of a spiritual companion to people. And so I was meeting with an older African-American woman one time, and she was just sharing some of her struggles with feeling just kind of an excessive level of responsibility for lots of people, just kind of carrying what to me felt like too much burden on her shoulders and a sense of responsibility for so many people. And so I just asked her, I said, why do you think you do that? Why do you think you might feel compelled to just carry so much weight and responsibility for so many people? And she just said, almost like it should be obvious, she's like, Rebecca, I'm the descendant of slaves. And when she said that, I remember thinking, wow, that's an interesting response. Like, I'm curious, like, tell me more about that. Because slavery, wasn't that a long time ago? Like, why would that have an impact on your current experience of life? And she went on to describe how a woman, a slave woman on the plantation, would be responsible for both the master's house, the big house, and keeping everybody happy there and taking care of that house, as well as her own household, as well as her own children that she had to take care of. And that a way to protect and care for her own was to keep the big house happy and keep the master's house happy. That's a lot of weight to carry, to basically be responsible for two households. And even though she herself, this woman that I was speaking with, was not currently a slave experiencing that, she was the descendant of that way of being. And that kind of effect of long-term sustained life experiences and trauma do get passed down generation after generation. Patterns form, and she was experiencing the weight of that in her own life. And I remember that just really opening up something for me, this idea of years and years of experiences that a people group would have and how that would have impact generation after generation. And so as I was doing a little research for this sermon, I came across this professor and therapist named Dr. Joy DeGruy. She wrote a book titled Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, where she discusses some of these ideas. And she kind of dubbed this idea of post-traumatic slave syndrome. She says she describes it as a condition that exists as a consequence of multi-generational oppression of Africans and their descendants resulting from centuries of chattel slavery. This is a form of slavery which was predicated on the belief that African Americans were inherently genetically inferior to whites. This was then followed by institutionalized racism, which continues to perpetuate this injury. And so she describes this thing resulting in what she describes as MAP. M would be the multi-generational trauma together with ongoing continued oppression. A is the absence of opportunity to heal or access the benefits available in society that leads to healing. And then P would be the post-traumatic slave syndrome. So the combination of multi-generations of trauma and ongoing injury and oppression with the absence of any form of acknowledgement, healing from all of this injury, and this results in this post-traumatic slave syndrome. And so most of us, if you've been around any kind of social sciences, you're probably aware of something that we call post-traumatic stress syndrome or post-traumatic stress disorder. And PTSD is a disorder that develops after someone's experienced either sustained traumatic experience or just even a one-time experience, like being in a car accident or something really shocking or scary, or maybe a dangerous event that they were a part of. And if this goes unresolved, if these events are unhealed, if they're not talked about, and through ongoing therapy and healing within community and spiritual healing, then it can kind of be embedded in someone's system. And it can manifest in things like anger and mood changes and feelings of foreshortened future, difficulty staying and falling asleep. Hypervigilance is kind of a state of increased alertness, lots of anxiety. We see this in vets that have come back from wars and where there's all kinds of ongoing treatment necessary to deal with these kinds of experiences of PTSD. And we know that trauma, that anyone that's done any work in the field of psychology or therapy, or even those of you in the church who've been part of our faith walking journey together, we know that trauma that isn't treated is transferred. That, in other words, if the injury inflicted on a parent isn't exposed and addressed, that it will manifest in brokenness and in unhealthy patterns and ways that are likely to emerge, and these will be transferred on to future generations. And so if you stop and think about it, for 339 years in our country, African Americans were sold, they were beaten, they were bred, they were mutilated, experimented on, raped. And then in 1865, nearly 4 million of these slaves were then just released into the population. And at what point in American history did they receive any treatment for their trauma? Any retribution, anything that was kind of set up to say, hey, you've been through sustained multi-generational trauma. We are going to provide help and treatment to help you heal from this. We're going to recognize what happened and provide places of healing. At what point did this happen? That any kind of this help was offered for these centuries of profound trauma? Well, it wasn't. In fact, although these slaves may have been legally freed, they weren't even close to receiving justice. The playing field wasn't even close to being leveled, and frankly, the trauma continues today. The playing field still isn't leveled. Even after slavery became illegal, there were all kinds of things called black codes and exclusionary laws and Jim Crow and redlining and the emergence of the Ku Klux Klan and on and on and on. Do you know that all the lynchings that occurred in our country happened after the abolition of slavery? And when we talk about things like slavery and lynchings and these sort of just horrific things from America's past, I know for many of us, the response is, well, that happened a long time ago, right? What does that have to do with me? I never owned slaves. I wasn't a part of that. That happened a long time ago. That's way in the past. Why are we still talking about this? Well, most of you are probably familiar with the name Ruby Bridges, right? She was the first African-American student to integrate an elementary school in the South. And do you know that at the age of 6, so just picture a little 6-year-old girl that walking to school with her little bag and her cute little dress and pigtails, that grown men and women, mothers and fathers, stood there screaming vicious slurs at her, throwing objects at a 6-year-old little girl on her way to school. That there was a woman that held up a black baby in a coffin. That people were threatening to poison her, to the point that they actually wouldn't allow her to eat the food at school for fear that somebody might actually follow through on this. And the aggression toward this vulnerable little girl would have likely been far worse if they hadn't had 4 federal marshals to escort her and her mother to school every day for the entire school year. Her parents suffered all kinds of loss too. Her father lost his job. The local grocery stores refused to sell to her mother. Her grandparents were evicted from the farm that they had lived in for 25 plus years. And guess what? Ruby Bridges is still alive. She's only 66 years old. She's younger than my parents. That means that the mothers and fathers that screamed at this little girl and threatened her and threw things at her could have been my grandparents. This stuff didn't happen a long time ago. This wasn't way in our past. This stuff is still happening. And when we dismiss both the profound traumatic history and the current state of injustice, we just perpetuate the trauma. As Dr. Joy DeGroy puts it, you keep breaking my leg and then complain that I limp. There are consequences to sustained, unacknowledged, and unhealed trauma. You can't heal what you don't know. When you don't heal, you pass along the impact of your injuries to the next generation. And multi-generational trauma, it's been proven, can actually get trapped in the DNA. And so I wonder if you've, actually, I'm going to skip that analogy and just move on here. What does this mean for us, the church? How are we called to respond? Because the church is meant to be the hope for the world, right? We're meant to be the agents of healing. So what's our responsibility? What's our responsibility, those of us who claim to love and follow Jesus? I'd like to take a look at a verse in Galatians. And if you aren't familiar, this is a letter that Paul was writing to the churches in Galatia. And actually, I love this letter. I'd love to do a series on this letter and just unpack it because it speaks so much to so many of the issues that we're facing right now. But today I'm just going to actually focus on one verse from Galatians. And that's chapter 6, verse 2. It says, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." It's interesting because if you listen to the final sermon that I gave on Labor Day weekend, where I was wrapping up the sermon series we did on the Sermon on the Mount, I spoke about what's been popularly dubbed as the Golden Rule. It's one of the most popular scriptures of all times, where Jesus says, "So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you." And then he says, "For this sums up the law and the prophets." And when I was talking about that, I alluded to another time in Matthew when the Pharisees asked Jesus, "What's the most important commandment?" And Jesus says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And then he says, and the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. This is found in Matthew 22:39. He says, all the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. Are you seeing a thread in these 3 verses? Are you seeing a trend? It seems that Paul's reminding the church what Jesus taught us here. That all the stuff that we go after, all the law and the commandments, the law and the prophets, all the rules and the regulations, all the teachings boil down to loving and serving each other well. laying down your agenda, your preferences, your privilege for the sake of your brother and sister. We are literally meant to carry in our beings the other's burdens, the other's hardships, the other's injuries, the other's trauma. And in this way, we fulfill the law of Christ. This is the church that Jesus died for. So in light of this particular burden that we're talking about today, where do we start? What does carrying each other's burdens look like here? I think the first and necessary step is just to expose the truth. Because quite honestly, America's pathology is her denial. But Jesus was all about bringing the truth to light, exposing darkness. Because in the light, when we call things for what they are, it is the beginning of healing. He said, the truth will set you free. So we have to tell the truth about something called white supremacy. And I know that's not a very popular word. And if you've never heard that term before, I'll just read to you what the Oxford Dictionary describes as white supremacy. It says, the belief that white people constitute a superior race and should therefore dominate society, typically to the exclusion or detriment of other racial and ethnic groups, in particular Black or Jewish people. Now, if you're white, like me, and you may be listening to this and you think, well, that does not describe me. I fully reject that ideology. That does not describe me at all. You may think we think of the word white supremacy, we attach it to the kinds of people we call white supremacists, right? Like skinheads or people that they propagate blatant racist beliefs, or they even commit destructive or violent racist acts. And we think we would never put ourselves in a category like that, right? But this view actually fails to recognize white supremacy as a system that has rigged society to disproportionately favor whiteness to the detriment of people of color. And this has been part of our formation, and most of us are not even aware of it. And we're not aware of how it's embedded into our system and our way of thinking and our way of looking at the world. It's so deeply ingrained and has been for our whole lives. Pastor and author Daniel Hill, in his book titled White Awake, he describes the difference between white and minority perspectives, even on just American history, in this way. He says, people of white European ancestry remember a history of discovery, open lands, manifest destiny, endless opportunities, and American exceptionalism. Yet communities of color, especially those with African and indigenous roots, remember a history of stolen lands, broken treaties, slavery, boarding schools, segregation, cultural genocide, internment camps, and mass incarceration. You know, after I read Daniel Hill's book, White Awake, a few months back, something that was very helpful for me in sort of understanding this idea of white supremacy and how to respond to it is understanding that the enemy is not white people, but the enemy is white supremacy. White supremacy is a carefully crafted demonic force that is our common enemy. It is an enemy for all of us, no matter what your race or ethnicity is. And it does damage to all of our souls. During my research for this sermon, I came across a photo of a lynching of a Black man taken many years ago. And in it, there was groups of people there to kind of watch this event. So in lots of towns, lynchings became like a public spectacle, almost like public entertainment. They would like post about it in the local paper, and people would all come, hordes of people would come out to watch it. Men, women, and children. And so in this photo, there's actually several children present watching the murdering of this person right before their eyes. And what's most disturbing about this photo is the pictures of the children's faces. They don't look shocked or traumatized as any child should after watching the murdering of a human being right before their very eyes. Not only do they not look appropriately disturbed, but one of the little girls, who looks to be about the age of my own son, Benjamin, about 9 or 10, has almost like a little smile, almost like a smirk on her face. That rather than a look of shock and trauma, and fear, she almost looked slightly entertained and interested in what she saw. And that reaction could only result from this child being formed in a belief that the Black man that she saw murdered in front of her very eyes, that he was not fully human, that he was something other than her. Otherwise, how could she watch something like that without being horrified, without being traumatized? And this little girl is an example of someone that is being profoundly damaged by white supremacy. It is demonic and it corrodes our souls, all of our souls, no matter where we're coming from. So the question is, what do we do about it? What do we, regardless of our race, how do we kind of link arms with each other against the shared enemy of white supremacy? I think the work that we're called to do as followers of Jesus has to start with our own identity. In Matthew 16:24, it says, "Then Jesus said to his disciples, 'Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul?'" I think the most important and the starting place for us as followers of Jesus is to strip away anything that we are clinging to or finding our own identity in other than him. So whether it's our nationalism, our strict allegiance to a political party, our wealth, if we are white, our whiteness, all these things that may give us a sense of security or power, but in it, we are actually forfeiting our souls. When we take up our cross, as Jesus called us to do, we lay down all of this and we find ourselves in Jesus. We find our identity in him and him alone. And it is here at the cross of Jesus that the playing field is level. It is here at the feet of Jesus where we are one. Go in peace, Vineyard Milwaukee.